Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tuesday night from Pacific Hermitage. Glad to see a few people starting to plug in for our evening. And we'll begin, as we usually do, with a period of meditation for half an hour or so, followed by a Dhamma reflection and time for some questions, hopefully some answers. Let's just begin our evening with a quiet sit to help settle the mind, settle the body, and prepare to reflect on some Dhamma from that quiet space established by a bit of meditation. So as usual, finding a comfortable position to sit in, not slumping, sitting up straight but not rigid, getting comfortable but not slouching and getting too comfortable. Find that base of support and groundedness in contact with the surface you're sitting on, cross-legged on the floor or on a bench or sitting in a chair, but with a firm sense of groundedness, allowing one's attention to expand to include the entire physical body, from the soles of the feet up and down, from the crown of the head. Coming in contact with the earth element, the solid parts of the body that give us a sense of weight, gravity. All the bones and muscles and tissues of the feet and legs and sit bones. Getting a good sense of that lower part of the body. And allowing that awareness to rise and expand throughout the abdomen, letting the small of the back open up so that the belly opens in the front. And allowing the attention to move up through the chest and along the spine and the back, so that the shoulders are a little bit back but not forced, and that the neck is aligned with the spine and the head. Arms relaxed, sitting in the lap or on the knees, thighs. And opening and relaxing in the face. Relaxing around the eyes, the forehead. Allowing space to open up. The jaw, mouth, nose. All the way up again through the eyes and the forehead. And the crown of the head. Open, spacious, yet in touch with groundedness as well. And after being firmly established in the entire body, just allow yourself to settle in gently with the natural rhythm of the breathing throughout the whole body. And to just dwell for the next half an hour or so with that full attention throughout the entire body and the gentle rhythm of the breathing. Welcome to Tuesday night. Okay, so just take a moment if you need, change posture, stand up, stretch for just a moment before um, coming back to a sitting position for the evening reflection. Okay, we'll come back to your sitting posture if you are standing, stretching. So it's my turn Tuesday evening to give a few reflections and to host the evening, help facilitate it. And this is sort of a little bit of a Dhamma reflection by request from somebody that we were talking to earlier today. The question came up of the Buddha's initial motivation to explore this path and to walk the path to liberation, and whether it included the Buddha actually experiencing suffering and being motivated by that, because the traditional recension of the Bodhisattva's path prior to his awakening, prior to his even going forth, is one that's based on a commentarial account of his life prior to that quest, and that he, as a young privileged prince in a royal household, was quite protected from the ways of the world, and that it was only on one occasion, or on several occasions actually, when he was leaving, when he left the palace and went out to the neighboring village or countryside and encountered an old person, and then a sick person, and then a dead body, a person who had passed away. And that these trips out of his protected palace life were what provided his initial motivation to go forth, and also the fourth heavenly messenger of the sight of a samana, the sight of the spiritual seeker. Because, of course, at that time in India, there were all sorts of spiritual traditions of many kinds with samanas, or seekers who were treading their particular path. So the heavenly messengers, as we call it, were considered to be his motivation to leave the palace and take on a practice. And I think if one looks at it that way, it doesn't necessarily convey a sense of personal suffering that he was responding to. That was kind of the question. Did the Buddha actually experience suffering as a motivation to look for this particular answer. And it's a little bit more terse in the suttas prior to his going forth, and something along the lines of a reflection that occurred to him uh, uh, when it's the case that I am subject to old age, sickness, and death. Why is it that I seek after that which is also subject to old age, sickness, and death? Why don't I seek out that which is not subject to old age, sickness, and death? That which is conducive to dispassion, cessation, relinquishment, freedom, nibbana. And that's kind of the account that's given for his initial motivation to leave the palace and shave his head, take on the training, or take on the lifestyle of a spiritual seeker. And when you think about it, that particular refrain, or that particular reflection that he had, must have been based on some experience of some sort where he saw the transiency of life, impermanence, changeability, and was motivated to explore an alternative to that experience. So somewhere along the line, if one goes by the more post-canonical story that I just mentioned, or if there were other, more possible ways that he came to that reflection on impermanence and unsatisfactoriness, maybe even in a protected palace life, seeing these things happen, or hearing about them, whatever the actual scenario was, this was the reflection that motivated him. So just from that statement alone, you can see that he did understand and experience at some level that sense of being disconcerted and realizing that there is suffering, and that change is an inevitable part of that. It's a root for that kind of suffering, because the world, as he realized, is unstable, changing, and there is an end to this life. So yes, he must have experienced that on a personal level. And one can look at the teachings and that motivation on a couple of different levels. The one that we're most used to talking about is our own, on a personal level, on the psychological level of how we experience those qualities of dukkha, of realizing inside ourselves unsatisfactoriness of our habits, our tendencies, the things that we take refuge in, and the transiency of all that when we look at it closely, and the personal level of unsatisfactoriness that we experience when we reflect on that, and the suffering that we can also experience in this world when things aren't the way we want them to be, when circumstances that are good change to bad or unfortunate, when we lose our livelihood, or we lose our friends or partners in some way or another. That experience, that internal experience of loss, and that's often a strong motivation for us on an individual level. There's also in the teachings and we don't talk about them quite so much, but if you've done any reading in the suttas, or been exposed to more traditional teachings, there's kind of that same narrative, but on a cosmological level, not just the individual experience, that acknowledges the continuity of these patterns over more than a single lifetime, and that the momentum of our habits, the momentum of our mind movements that keep getting us into trouble in the right here and now also course over a long, in fact, inconceivable amount of time that we've been doing the same thing. And sometimes that's a bit of a stretch for traditional Western thinkers, but it's something is quite accepted in more traditional Buddhist cultures. And it's certainly part and parcel of the canon. It's consistent throughout the canon, and is something that, at least in the story of the Buddha's enlightenment, played a fairly significant, in fact, a very significant role in his ability to realize the teaching, realize the complete ending of suffering. And it's reflected on and expounded on in his account of the night of his awakening. Prior to that experience, that night, he had explored many different traditions and different ways of practicing, including in the beginning hooking up with a couple of very well known and renowned meditation teachers at that time. The first one he encountered and spent some time with was a seeker named Alara Kalama, who he studied under and trained under, and was able to reach the level of meditative attainments that Alara Kalama had attained. And that attainment was one of what's called the formless attainments, which go beyond the jhanas and are very expansive experiences of very refined states of minds, refined states of consciousness. And there's 4 of them: the sphere of infinite space, the sphere of infinite consciousness, the sphere of no thingness, and the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception. And these are all very, very extremely refined states of consciousness. And the Buddha was able to access the one that Alara Kalama had attained to, which was the third one, the sphere of no thingness or nothingness. And as he did that and reflected on it, he realized that, as refined as it was not what he was seeking. It was not the end of suffering. It was still part of the conditioned realm. It was fabricated, created through the effort of meditation. But that even if it could provide a lot of peace in the mind, it too, over time, was subject to deterioration because it was fabricated in the first place. And anything that he realized, anything that is fabricated, tends to will fade away at some point, no matter how exalted or refined it is. So realizing that, he left that teacher and went and found over time another teacher called Uddaka Ramaputta, who had experienced a higher stage, the 4th of those 4 attainments, the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception, which is kind of a conundrum for most of us about what that means. And I'm not going to try and even explain it or go into detail on this one, but it's a very, very, very refined state of consciousness. Yet the fact that one can't really define it in terms of perception or non-perception, there is still it's still a willed form of experience. It's still fabricated and itself also subject to deterioration. And the Buddha realized that and said, okay, well, these are all pretty amazing, but this isn't nibbana. This isn't the deathless. This isn't, the end point that's possible from his understanding. So that's the point where he broke off from the teachers and went and started to practice on his own, and went through a very lengthy period of practicing austerities. He pretty much deprived himself of almost all food except just barely enough to keep him barely living, and got very wasted and weak, and other kinds of austerities that were prevalent at that time in different spiritual paths. Self-mortification essentially was what he was engaging in, following the path of, to see if that was the path to the deathless. And at some point after doing that, he realized, no, this isn't the path either. I don't find myself any more free from suffering than I did prior to engaging in these. And then he had an insight of a childhood experience, of remembering when he experienced a very peaceful state of mind, but not a super refined consciousness experience like he had from his other two teachers previous to that, in the form of experiencing the first jhana as a child, the first level of a very, very peaceful state of mind, and reflected, maybe this is the kind of mind I need, this kind of level of quietude, but not way out there, still very much in touch with the body and experience. Maybe this is the path to explore. And so he reflected, yes, I really think that's what I need to do. And so he went back and kind of revised his approach to meditation, and kind of back and reset the button, and worked with that level of meditative concentration, and then started to realize that he could reflect on experience while still in a very peaceful state of mind. And it was those reflective experiences that started to help him gain the insight that he needed to realize the path completely. And what I think is really instructive to me, and something that I reflect on quite a bit, is exactly what it is that he experienced in those reflections. And as the suttas describe, on the night of his enlightenment, after he had started taking food again and regaining some physical strength, recovering from his extreme austerities, he had enough energy to start reflecting again. And on the night of his enlightenment, kind of divides it up into 3 watches of the night, 3 major levels of insight, I guess you might want to call it, levels of realization. And for the first watch of the night, he spent the time reflecting on his own personal narrative, meaning how he had, since an inconceivable beginning, as the suttas go, since an inconceivable beginning, he had been coursing through samsara, countless lives, many lifetimes, many eons of lifetimes, many eons of world contraction and expansion, just being reborn over and over again in different forms and different realms, and different experiences, and how it was relentless, essentially, and impossible to define in terms of a limited experience. It was just vast and expansive, and the amount of suffering that he experienced throughout this, what's like this inconceivable amount of time. And this was a very, from what you can imagine, this is an extremely sobering realization. This is sort of like, okay, well, I know the experience of suffering in this current lifetime, and that's not great to begin with. And what this human life has to hold in the end, old age, sickness, and death, is bad enough. But look how much I've been doing that. Look, for this, this is going on. This has been going on essentially forever, and projecting that into the future. If I don't do something about it, this is, what the potential is to continue. Samsara is endless. So you can imagine that there was a pretty emotional effect, and that the notion that we maybe sometimes have of the Buddha just kind of developing his meditation and then kind of, just breezing ever so more refined and happy and blissful into nibbana isn't quite the narrative that he presents. He presents this vast samsara as being a motivation to really understanding the nature of suffering and how to end it. So that's the first watch of the night. And then the second watch of the night, he moved on to not just his personal narrative, but to the worlds at large, the various realms of existence that beings are reborn into, and seeing how that same process that he realized happened for himself are happening with almost countless number of beings, being reborn over and over again from one realm to another, according to their karma, and the vast amount of, obviously some very high and blissful rebirths in heavenly realms, and also some very unfortunate and painful experiences, both in the human realm and in lower realms, animal realm, etc. And just spent that watch of the night reflecting and watching that happen. And you can just imagine, the amount of urgency and disenchantment with the conditioned realm that brought up in him, seeing this all happen on a vast level. And before getting to the third watch of the night, just for myself, I really like to reflect on those first two watches of the night, not because I have any ability whatsoever to see back into my past lives or see the arising and passing of beings in other realms, but to take that concept and that teaching and apply it to myself. Essentially take that on faith, because I is pretty strong in the teachings, and I can see how the momentum for existence and for bad habits in my own heart and mind right here in this very life are so strong that I can't imagine that it would stop just at the ending of this particular body. But all that aside, that reflection is, I think, sufficient for all of us to really give us a sobering sense that I think is needed to really, really take this practice beyond just, looking at how we create a more comfortable life in the here and now. Yeah, that's for each of us individually to decide if and when we want to kind of take on that level of reflection. And it doesn't prevent us from realizing a lot of benefits from the teaching without it. But it's a very, very powerful motivating force. And I think in the Buddha's narrative, it was that level of understanding of dukkha, and particularly in the transiency and the relentlessness of this experience, that provided the motivation for him to become so disinterested in all the ways that we are motivated to keep on suffering through the pursuit of trying to find satisfaction in that which is inherently unsatisfactory, trying to find stability in that which is inherently unstable. And that very, very strong realization and motivation was what propelled him into the third watch of the night, which is described as where he made the breakthrough. And understood and realized the ending of what's called the asavas, the outflows of mind, the outflow of mind that is towards sensual experience, sensuality, the outflow of mind that's moving towards becoming, repetitive existence, um, and the outflow of ignorance, basically ignorance of the Four Noble Truths, the ignorance of suffering, the origin of suffering, the path leading out of suffering, and the realization of the end. So these were the outflows of mind that we all work with, that the Buddha was able to see an end to during that third watch of the night, with this extreme motivation towards disenchantment and dispassion with the way that he had lived his many, many lives. And in that third watch of the night, he had the final breakthrough to the complete ending of suffering by the release from these outflows of mind and the complete and full understanding of that Four Noble Truths. So yes, the Buddha, to answer the original question, the Buddha did really, understand suffering from a very deep personal experience, and had to reflect on it, with that level of sincerity that causes one to just overcome these very, very entrenched habits of mind, and to relinquish through disenchantment and dispassion, to relinquish all of these forces that lead one on to renewed existence, renewed suffering. So I always just reflect on that as a very, very powerful motivation to keep me on the path. Along with that reflection that, we all have that ability to do that, and that the path is not only one of reflecting on these things to keep us motivated, but also enjoying the fruits of practice as it comes along in its very gradual way. But as we progress even little bits along the path, we see little examples of how we can let go of the mental habits that cause us suffering in this very life. And that reflection on the kind of the cosmological nature of suffering and the end of suffering doesn't negate the fact that the work to be done is right here and right now, and that all of this is to be done by examining our experience right here in this present moment, and to really come to understand how right here and right now we have these habits that create our unsatisfactory experience, and we have the tools right here and right now to reflect on those and apply the teachings in a way that results in less suffering in the here and now, and the potential for a complete end of suffering over the long term. So yeah, the Buddha did reflect on dukkha, reflected on impermanence and transiency, and felt it at a very deep level, and was really, those were the strong motivators that got him to the goal line, that facilitated his full enlightenment, his full release out of suffering. So I'll just offer that for a little bit of reflection this evening, and maybe we can take a look and see what kind of questions we have here. See where it starts. Whoop. I think it might start before that.
It does.
Yeah. Okay, having trouble scrolling up.
I don't know how to work this.
Yeah, let me see. I'm a little more. Oh, there you go. I say I'm a little more familiar with Chromebooks. Here, let me give a little. You can use two fingers.
Why is this so easy?
because I have a Chromebook thing. So, okay, here we go. Okay, here we go. Okay. Speaking of dukkha, I notice a fixation on self when experiencing anxiety generated from trauma based on past and more recent abuse. 1, is it more skillful to let go of being self-absorbed, or do we need to turn towards ourselves to heal trauma? Well, it's kind of all of the above, in a sense. Certainly, the path towards healing involves a need to recognize the First Noble Truth, the truth of dukkha, and to examine our own experience of trauma, and to really understand it by allowing it in. And I say that, though, but allowing it in without moving into reliving it over and over again. I think that's the trap that oftentimes people get into with extreme emotional states, or particularly based on past experiences, traumatic or even less dynamic than trauma. The tendency is to go back and relive and chew over these experiences in a way that doesn't actually result in release or insight. Yet at the same time, we can't ignore it. We can't pretend that it didn't happen, or just when a memory pops up or a bad feeling pops up, we can't thinking. When we start reliving the story, recreating the story, and attending to that over and over again, that papancha problem just escalates our feeling of suffering. And that conceptualization and that reliving over and over again is essentially the self-absorption that happens. It is this tendency to grab hold of these memories and turn them into living realities and experience them as mine or me. These memories that are popping up, these perceptions are popping up, we experience with a strong sense of ownership and identification with them. And so we do need to recognize this kind of self-involvement in the suffering process and reflect on that. And letting go of the story itself and kind of directing one's attention away from that and more to the immediate experience on a deeper level of feeling and perception, particularly, again, as experienced through the body, is one approach that one can take towards seeing what its true nature is and letting go of the self-possession of that experience. So it's tricky business in that you have to both recognize and understand the dukkha. That's the duty of the First Noble Truth. The truth of dukkha is to be understood, and then to let go of the habitual ways that we keep turning back to those experiences. So that's kind of the Buddhist answer. It's also, in cases of severe trauma like this, it's probably not a bad idea to consider getting somebody who's skilled in that realm, like who's skilled in dealing and helping people who have had traumatic experience, to kind of walk through some of these techniques on an ongoing basis, on an ongoing relationship, because it's really hard to try and do this on one's own from a theoretical basis, and that kind of connection with somebody who kind of has some experience in this area can be very helpful, particularly when there's, when it's very hard to let go of the old mental habits that keep it going. So it's just some thoughts. Paul, any other thoughts on that one?
No, that's great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Huge trauma in life due to bullying or untimely death of a loved one does not let us relish happiness of pleasant things that come afterwards. How to deal with this? Well, it's that kind of sense of, related to that first question, of how we let past experiences that have a negative effect on us, how we let that color our whole life to the point where we don't see the other things that happen. And it's, it's very clear that, human life is a mixture of pleasant and unpleasant experience, sometimes really, really pleasant, sometimes really, really unpleasant, and oftentimes much more in the middle of vaguely pleasant or vaguely unpleasant. But that we keep on bouncing back and forth between those two kinds of experience. And, sometimes we develop habits for who knows what reason that it's easy to stay absorbed in the unpleasant mental experiences and let those moods color our entire experience, so that we aren't able to see the fact that it's not always that way. And it just, I think, keeps coming back to acknowledging that and seeing that process, and how that kind of attention, what we might call unwise attention to the memories and the feelings of those traumatic experiences, just colors our whole lives, so that everything looks bleak, even when things aren't bleak. And the need to really start to learn how to shift one's attention and stop the thinking process around going back to and reliving those things, just as I mentioned in that previous question, and to be very repetitive and skillful of turning one's attention to recollections that bring a sense of peace to the mind. And I don't mean just pleasant things like, in the sense realm, but more of these traits that we can develop that are broader, open states of mind, in terms of skillful emotional states of metta and karuna, kindness, compassion. And also putting ourselves in a position where we're with other people in a way that we might be able to offer help, offer service, generosity, kindness, even just, spending time with somebody who's in difficulty or doesn't have as much as we have, or helping someone in some way, putting oneself in that position to give, even in very, very small ways, and then reflecting on that helps us get out of this kind of gloom or depression that can come with if we have spend a lot of time reflecting on the past difficulties. Again, as I mentioned in the previous question, it's important to acknowledge and deal with the reality of situations that have happened, but stopping at the point of proliferating and attending and shifting the attention back to the experience in the body, calming, soothing, letting go of that, as well as turning towards any reflection, any recollection of a time that maybe somebody was kind to you, somebody offered a help or a thoughtful word of support. Just reflecting on those, bringing those to mind, proliferating on those experiences to just kind of loosen the grip of the darker states of mind.
Yes, I mean, I think it's just really nothing really to add, but just to emphasize that reality. I mean, that's like modern psychology already sort of acknowledges and recognizes, like negativity bias. It's where the mind goes, and it is almost a universal habit of the human mind. So we do need to counter that, and yeah, generosity, sharing, being of service, being is extremely helpful, because it gets us out of ourselves and then aligns us with good people, and that's a really important element. Just that being able to draw close to others who are generous, who are kind, who are modeling skillfulness, and then paying attention, drawing attention to it, and then reflecting on our ways for ourselves, how we can, like dana and sila, generosity and integrity or virtue are, and you say they're so overlooked in a kind of a modern Western culture. So it's really important to recognize that. Yeah.
Okay. Ajahns, I have a question. I spend time in the ERs for work. My colleagues, doctors, nurses, hospital staff, and I are frustrated and angry about people refusing to get vaccinated. What advice can you offer us? I'm exhausted and scared and demoralized, and also worried about my friends who are full-time in hospitals. Sort of a in the moment kind of form of dukkha. It's a here and now kind of problem to deal with the mind states that come up about our feelings about other people's choices, and I think it's just an opportunity to widen that ability to hold other beings in our hearts, even when we think they're making poor choices, even when we think that they might be harming other people by their choices, and to realize that it's certainly the here and now reflection of these days. Some people have, a lot of people have, but to remember that this is samsara, that people aren't going to do things in the way that we think that they should. You may be absolutely right or justified in a sense, but being justified logically justified doesn't make your own frustration and anger go away. It's like, you know, we do have oftentimes, you know, a strong sense of righteous indignation for whatever injustices or things that choices that people make that we disagree with. And there's a certain, possibly, you know, in many cases, there's a certain righteousness to it, but there's also the indignation, and that's going to always cause suffering. So just realizing that that level of reaction and frustration, if taken on, absorbed into, is going to create a very unhappy state of mind, and probably won't change things either. So, you know, you can realize that this is in your, you know, mind and experience an unfortunate state of affairs, and rail against it and feel bad about it, or you can realize that this is an unfortunate, difficult state of affairs and understand that, but without creating that added level of resistance and reactivity to it. It's still there, whether you know, develop a strong feeling of demoralization and depression around it. So that's not like an immediately gratifying answer, in a sense, and it takes a while to just kind of allow that level of spaciousness to sink in. It's like Ajahn Sumedho's definition of patience as being the peaceful coexistence with the difficult, peaceful coexistence with the unpleasant. It doesn't deny that there's unpleasantness or difficulty, but we learn how to broaden our ability to hold it, broaden our ability to contain it, so that the experience is still there, but it's felt in a very different way from a broad, open container of kindness and compassion for the suffering of others. Where did that question go to? Go back up. There you go. Yeah. Oh, and then just, I know the other thing is just to also, you know, I find it useful to reflect that there's actually, you know, that people who are not getting vaccinated, you know, we can't, I don't think it's so good to pigeonhole them into one particular mind state or mindset. I think that, you know, there's often different reasons, and sometimes people are dwelling with what some of us might call misinformation or disinformation, and being, you know, associating with peers who are supporting that, or some people are acting out, and oftentimes there's a basis of fear and anxiety about different aspects of that whole process. So people are just doing what people are doing based on their own, you know, states of mind that we can all relate to. And there is just that, you know, this is a particular issue that they are feeling their fear and anxiety around, and you know, all the reasons that people can have for making those choices. So yeah, we just have to learn how to expand and be able to hold that, and keep on plugging on as best we can. Certainly trying to argue people into submission doesn't seem to work in this case. And I think a lot of patience is really important in this one.
Yeah, and I don't know I mean, I'm also, yeah, everything that you said is great, but then I'm also wondering if there is ways of, within. I mean, America's medical system is broken anyway, and but I wonder if there isn't ways of being able to, like, some kind of support, and I mean, it's maybe worthy of a broader conversation. I mean, not just as a practice thing, but as a broader conversation in the society of how does the society support people who are caregivers?
Right. It's tremendous burnout in the healthcare field.
Tremendous burnout, and there's just so much expected of them, and and just as human beings, we can only take so much,
Right.
and to be able to find support in ways that they can, and I don't know how to do that. I have no idea. I wonder if conversations can't be started or somehow,
Right.
and being able to just to be able to not, just to be able to step back from it for a while. Because I mean, it's a thing that, I mean, caregivers are caregivers. They already have a level of compassion to begin with. But it gets tough. That and how can you just step back and not get penalized for it?
Right.
In that sense, how
Take the time to.
How can I take time off and not get penalized for it?
Blamed for it or pulled back for the job. Yeah.
So anyway, those are
I think
those are thoughts that don't have any solution. But,
well, I think
it's especially for ordinary people to be able to be recognizing that these are not robots that keep going.
No, I think there might be some solution, but it will probably take some work on people's part to organize it. Just as you were talking about that, we do need to. People need to find ways of supporting themselves and each other in this situation. It reminded me back in the 80s, a long time ago, when I was working with people with AIDS, during the massive periods of disruption in people's lives and dying, and solutions not being offered or found, and the intensity of being, in my situation, a nurse with this all going on, and the whole aspect of frustration and caregiver burnout. And and one of the volunteer groups I was working with, Shanti, as we were providing volunteer support to people with AIDS and families of people with AIDS, part of that whole volunteer and caregiving process involved, essentially, in this particular group, mandatory meetings with your peers. And we had small groups for support of people who were doing the same thing, and then we'd come together in large groups also, and learning how to give and receive support for each other in these really, really difficult, trying circumstances was really the only thing that made it possible to keep plugging through it. So I think that's a really good idea that you mentioned, finding ways to support each other. Okay. Okay, well, that looks like it's the end of the questions.
I think so.
Okay, so any announcements for this evening before we completely close?
Maybe just encourage people to take a look at the website
Right?
for the recent announcements.
Recent announcements about the Paba coming up on September 18th and 19th. Some new announcements regarding the venue and precautions that we'll be taking and things like that. It should be appearing on our website. If it's not already there this afternoon, it should be appearing sometime in the next day or so. So that, and on a more community level, we also have a garden party coming up in about a week and a half.
Yes, it'll be about a week and a half.
Saturday,
September 4th.
September 4th.
September 4th.
For those who are able to come and join us for our once a month garden party to just help do some property maintenance in the garden and various areas around. It's first Saturday.
Yeah, great.
So I guess that's about it.
Okay.
So we'll say good night.
Good night, everyone. Take care. Okay.